Tonight, we're starting with the book of Deuteronomy. I did an in-depth study of Genesis and the Exodus, and we're doing, we skipped Leviticus for right now. We're going to do and Numbers. We're going to do Deuteronomy. And there's a reason for that, and maybe we'll get into that tonight, and maybe we won't. But I knew that everybody would be excited about going into an in-depth study of Deuteronomy. So a question I have, why should we do in-depth studies of books like Deuteronomy? Well, let me ask you this. You don't have to raise your hand. Up until Sunday school, you started reading through the book. Have you read the book of Deuteronomy? Okay, you already done the book of Deuteronomy. Up until then, think about how many times you had read the book of Deuteronomy. And think about how many times you have studied the book of Deuteronomy as well as just reading it, because reading the book of Deuteronomy is not, it takes a little more work than that with a book like the book of Deuteronomy. And I've told you with this one, just like I did the other two, the commentary that I'm working from was written by a Jew. A guy that was raised, he went to school half the day in Hebrew and half the day in English when he's growing up, so he speaks Hebrew just as well as he does English. So, and the book of Deuteronomy naturally was written in the book in Hebrews. It was in the Hebrew language. So, who better to go to for commentary on these than somebody who understands the language? And so that's the reason I'm using his particular commentary on this. It's just like that on Genesis and Exodus. So, what is Deuteronomy? Greek word, deuteronomion, which means second law or the second telling of the law. Hebrew name of that book is Devarim, which means the words. That's pretty well it describes it. Some people, you'll hear the phrase to deuteronomion tauto, and it means the second law the same. It's basically, if you go to a literal translation of what it means. Why do we have it? Why do we have the book of Deuteronomy written in a Greek name instead of a Hebrew name? No. It was originally written in Hebrew, naturally, but in our Bibles it says it's Deuteronomy, and all the Bibles that we have it says is Deuteronomy, which comes from a Greek word, not from a Hebrew word.
It was translated from Hebrew to Greek, and then King James put it in English.
Well, yes, you're hitting along the right. What I think is the reason. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament of the Hebrew Bible, and it was translated back about the 3rd century BC. So during Jesus' time, most likely when Jesus quoted the Bible, he was probably quoting the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Hebrew Scripture, because everybody spoke Aramaic and wrote in Greek at that particular time. So Greek was the more known language. So that would be my estimation as to why it's a Greek word that they used there. And I bet you'd never thought about until you had studied or looked at it, where in the world you got the name Deuteronomy to name a book. It's not exactly a name that rolls off your tongue easily. So, why would God allow so many religions if only one is true? So I got a quote here. The existence of many religions does not mean God authored all of them as equally true. It means human beings made to worship have expressed that impulse in many directions, sometimes with partial glimpses of truth, often mixed with error, and sometimes in direct rebellion against God. And I have a comment that I followed that with, that what would, if you're trying to get in the mindset of how Satan would look at this, would he rather try to prove God didn't exist, or would he rather create a bunch of different religions where people had varying ideas of who God was? Because by nature, human beings worship. They're going to worship something. It's in the Soviet Union. They had. Did you know that Vladimir Lenin? Do you know his body is still on display in the Soviet Union? And it has been since he died in 1922, and they keep it refreshed, and it's highly embalmed naturally, and they do maintenance work on it. They had Stalin's body beside him for a while until it came out how horrible Stalin was. They took him out, but they left Lenin. Well, in communism, they didn't want them worshiping God. Well, the people were going to worship something. And so they're basically worshiping a man, a system. So they're worshiping something. And the Russian people were a very religious people for a long time. You heard the Russian Orthodox Church. So in my estimation, Satan would create a lot of different religions rather than trying to do away with the one true religion, because that would make it more confusing and people would be worshiping something and wouldn't be worshiping the true God. So, religion, the belief in and worship of a superhuman power or powers, especially a God or gods. So how many religions were in the Garden of Eden? There was no such thing as a religion back then. A lot of people say, well, it was Hebrew. No, we're talking about in the beginning with Adam and Eve. They wouldn't have had any particular religion because they were it. When you went to church on Sunday morning, they didn't go on Sunday morning, but when they went to church on Sunday morning, it was Adam and Eve. And so I guess one of them could lead the choir, which was Adam, led the choir, which was Eve, or what. But there's only two people there. So what we think about in religion came up much later. And in my estimation, it started out in the beginning. There was one God, the God that we celebrate, that we worship, is one God. And then it began, as man multiplied, it began to and separated. More and more and more and more and more and more religions were created. Some people say, why is it there was so many religions back years ago, but there's less today? And they say it's because evolution of religion is that it's coming back closer to one. Well, the truth is, it started out with the one. How many gods was there in the beginning? How many is there now? So, what religion did Moses write Deuteronomy for? Pardon me? He didn't write it for a religion. What we think of the Jewish religion was not what they were. They were creating that particular religion at this time out of what Moses wrote, and I believe Moses wrote the first 5 books, what we call the Pentateuch, what the Jews call the Torah, first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I believe that Moses wrote all of them, which is going to bring up a question in just a minute. A few things, I'm going to give you a few things that the Torah introduced through Moses that did not exist up until that time. The first one is a universal God. When God had Moses to write the scriptures, and he gave him the law and he gave him the things that Moses wrote down, that wasn't written just for that group of people, just for that nationality, just for that race of people. The Jewish people, if you talk to them, the more Orthodox Jews, they believe that Jews' purpose on this earth is to bring the Torah to the world, to bring the law to the world. Second one is the invisible, incorporeal God. The physical is not all there is. In other words, God is not physical like we are. Next one was a moral God. Have you read any of the Roman mythology, Greek mythology, and you read how those gods functioned and what they did? There was no, you would have a god who was married to a human, or impregnated a woman, a human woman, and had a child, and this child was a god that was that was the son of a god, or the daughter of a god that was half god and half man. And this is what you have in all the other world religions up until this particular time, is they worship many gods. They didn't have just one god. And it wasn't necessarily a moral God. Some of the things they did, some of the things their gods did was not moral. It was not good stuff. Pardon me? It was very human. It was worse than many humans. Next concept, a God beyond nature. God made nature, therefore is not natural. This is the nature gods. And what I mean by the nature gods is they believed in the sun god, they believed in the moon god, they believed in the fertility god, they believed in a god, they believed, depending on which religion you're looking at, they believed what caused the sun to rise and set was that God was born in the morning, and then he died in the evening, and he came back to life again the next morning. And some of them believed it was a chariot with a rider in it that rode across the sky. They had all different ways of describing how things of nature worked. And so they had what you would refer to as nature gods, not just like we have one and only God. And so this really didn't put an end to the nature God idea. If you follow the Torah, follow the writings of Moses, it does away with this idea of a nature God. A God who loves and wants to be loved. You can tell that, again, by going back to some of the other gods up until that time, and even after then, those gods weren't necessarily loving gods. Next one is universal human worth. God created man in whose image? In his image. So that means that mankind, human beings, have universal worth, period. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're born, you have worth. And universal human rights is a thing that we'll be talking about not long from now, because July the 4th is right around the corner, and the founding of our nation, the 250th birthday. But it's universal human rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that goes right along with what, in the teachings of what Moses has here. Who was Deuteronomy and the Torah written for? Kind of answered that already. For everybody. It's written for everybody. They saw it, the Jewish people saw it as it was written for them. The priests, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Qumran, all the different ones, the Essenes, all the different ones in the first century especially that we read about in our New Testament, they felt like the Torah was written God wrote this to the Jewish people, period. But it's really for all people. So, to get us started in the right direction, there's virtually no narrative in Deuteronomy. That's one thing that makes it hard to read. The book of Numbers tells stories along with the numbers, telling how many from each tribe and so on. It tells stories. The book of Exodus tells a story. Each one of those, Genesis tells stories, has different stories in it. But the book of Deuteronomy is practically no narrative at all. It's laws and beliefs is all it is. And when you start reading if you just took a law book and decided, I'm going to read this for entertainment, how much fun would that be? And I've always been honest with all of you here. The book of Leviticus is boring. It's in the Bible, and people think that's sacrilege to say, well, the book of Deuteronomy is not much more exciting than the book of Leviticus is. It's a little bit more so. This is the final words of Moses to the people. So it's a book of laws and beliefs. So I'm going to start with Deuteronomy 1:1. These are the words Moses spoke to all Israel. This is his final address, and it's in 3 parts, is the way the book of Deuteronomy is. Of course, we're going to start in the first part tonight, and there's breaks that you can see in there. And he's making these statements to you. Remember that when he finishes this at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses is dead. In fact, either Moses saw into the future at the end of Deuteronomy, or somebody else finished up the book, because it talks about his death. And it's kind of hard to talk about your own death. Why didn't Moses give new commandments? In the book of Deuteronomy, I'm asking a question before I tell you. In the book of Deuteronomy, there are some commandments, there are some laws that are not in Exodus or Leviticus. He adds to them. Nachmanides, Jewish rabbi from back in what, 10th century, somewhere along there. This is what he says. The reason the new commandments were, this is his opinion, the reason the new commandments were not mentioned in earlier books is that perhaps these commandments, though incumbent on the individual, wherever he might be, were not actually practiced until they entered the land. Moses did not mention them until it was time for the generation of those who left Egypt to take possession of the land. And I think that's pretty good reasoning. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But there's some added there, and I'm of the belief that God gave these to Moses for him to give to the people. Moses didn't just come along and say, I don't think you had enough of them in Exodus and Leviticus, so I'm going to add some more in Deuteronomy, just in case you need a few more laws. I guess maybe one of these days we ought to memorize the 613 laws that are in the Mosaic laws. I don't intend to do that. I'm not going to assign that as an assignment. But in Numbers 15:2 it says this, speak to the Israelites and tell them, when you enter the land I am giving you to settle in. So in other words, in the book of Numbers, he's talking about when you enter into it, and that's the scripture that he used for this particular one to anchor what he had said. Deuteronomy 1:1. These are the words Moses spoke to all the Israelites across the Jordan in the wilderness, in Arabah opposite Suph, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Dizahab. I love these names. The good thing, I've told you all this before, what I like about these names, you can pronounce them any way you want to because nobody will correct you. Nobody knows. Did Moses write all the Torah? And that's what I was talking about before. The last part of it, if he wrote it as a prophecy, or he wrote it after he died. So he wrote it from the grave. It is the 11th day journey from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by way of Mount Seir. Just a matter of note here, when you see Mount Seir in the Bible, or you see Horeb, or you see Mount Sinai, it's talking about the same place. And you wouldn't know that unless you go back and research it some. Verse 3. In the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month. This is something else that's different in the Torah, in the Pentateuch, in our Bible, in our Old Testament, just like it is in our New Testament as well. You read other religions and other books of religion, they do not give you dates, they don't give you times of the year, they don't give you any of this, but the Bible does. So it anchors it to particular times. He said, in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, Moses told the Israelites everything the Lord had commanded him to say to them. This was after he had defeated King Sihon of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and King Og of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth at Edrei. Across the Jordan in the land of Moab, Moses began to explain this law, saying. So here he is, he's introducing it. He's going to start explaining to him what he's part of this is a rehearsal of what he's already said. But at this time, how long had they been in the wilderness? 40 years. 40 years is a long time to remember something. And so he's finishing up back where he started. The people that, well, I'll ask this in a minute. So this marks the first address of and the last, which this one ends in Deuteronomy 4:40, in just case you wanted to know. 8th verse. See, I have set the land before you. enter and take possession of the land the Lord swore to give to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their future descendants. And I put the purpose for taking possession of the promised land was to enable the Israelites to build a society that would be light unto the nations. That's what it says. Isaiah 49:6 says that. So you're establishing a nation not just for this particular nation, but for all the world, to all the nations. If the Israelites engaged in immoral behavior, they too would be dispossessed. Leviticus 18:28 says, if you defile the land, it will vomit you out as it has vomited out the nations that were before you. Did the Israelites goof it up? After that, they spent more time goofing up than they spent getting it right. So God created a covenant with Abraham for a purpose. And far as I'm concerned, the purpose was to get Jesus into the world. But it had to create a nation, it had to create a people in order to do that, and for Jesus to be born within this covenant it made with Abraham. And that's what he's extending here with Moses when he's in the Mosaic law, all the way from Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and in Deuteronomy that we're studying now. It says, if you defile the land, it will vomit you out as it vomited out all the other nations. In other words, you're not immune to this either. So now back to verse 9. I said to you at the time, I can't bear the responsibility for you on my own. Moses said, you people are too much to handle. And I agree with him. They're too much to handle. I got a note there. Moses said, I said to you at the time. Who was he addressing? In Deuteronomy, who was he addressing? Okay, leaders of the tribes. How long had they been there? How many years had it been since they didn't go into the land the first time? 40 years. What happened to the people that he was talking to in Exodus and Leviticus? They all died. So who's he talking to now? He's talking to the children and the grandchildren of the ones that were born back then, but he's talking to them as if it was present. He says, I said to you at the time. At the time, some of them weren't even born. And some of them, if they were born, they were kids. They were small at this particular time. But he was addressing them. Moses spoke like this throughout, mixing past, present, and future generations, because he was addressing every generation who will ever read Deuteronomy. So he was addressing all the people, including us. So do you read the Bible as past tense when you're reading the stuff you're in there that tells you to do? When it talks about Jesus, is Jesus past tense or present tense or future tense? And the answer is yes. He's all of those. He's past, present, and future. Did Jesus die for all the people that were born and died after he was on this earth? No, he died for everybody who was born before him and who was born while he was here and after he had died. Jesus' gift of salvation was past, present, and future. How can somebody do that? Because if you're outside of time, time is much different. Bible scholar Richard Elliott Friedman, professor of Jewish studies at the University of Georgia, said this: the concept of a nation or people is a fluid one, crossing lines of generations, like a river which is constantly being made up of new molecules of water, yet is always the same river. So a people retains its identity even though its individual members are constantly changing over time. We are Americans. Were we born when America was founded? No, but we are Americans, just like the Jewish people, the people of that day. He could speak to them like he was speaking to them present day because they were of the same race, the same group of people, the same ones the covenant was given to. Jerry, you look like you just want to say something so bad. Okay. Verse 13, appoint for yourself wise, understanding, and respected men from each of your tribes, and I will make them your leaders. You notice he did not tell them to get good men. Why didn't he mention that? Well, let me ask you this. I don't want to vote here, so I'm not going to ask it this way. So I'll tell you this. John F. Kennedy, in his personal life, was a slug. He was a womanizer. He was low life in so many ways. He did some great things as president. So if we had disqualified him, because if we have a president now, Donald Trump, if we disqualified him because of his past life and the way he has been a womanizer and he's been vulgar and he's been rude, if we disqualified him from all that, if we disqualified any man that's ever been president of the United States for the negatives in their life, how many presidents would we have had? Well, we'd had George Washington. They said he never told a lie, which was a lie. We know he did. Well, Jimmy Carter was a good man. There's a lot of his policy I disagreed with 100%, but I think basically he was a good man. And there's been other presidents who have been good men, and I agree with some of what they said, and some of what they did, and some they didn't. I'm not saying Donald Trump is a bad man. I'm just saying that there's grounds upon which he wants you to, that God wanted them to select men for, and offices he wanted them to hold, and they didn't have to be good necessarily to do it, but they had to be these things. They had to be wise, understanding, and they had to be people that he could use for their wisdom, not just for their goodness. So you don't have to be a good person to be a good leader. It helps. I would rather have a good, godly, Christian man to serve as President of the United States, and some of you ladies say, or woman, but I say man. I'm a man, because you hadn't noticed, and so I'll always say man. And the House and the Senate and the Supreme Court and all the courts and the local offices, and I would like for all of them to be perfect, godly people, wouldn't you? What's the odds of that happening? If that's what we have in an election, if that's when we go to the polls, all we can elect, all we can vote for are perfect people. They're good and wholesome. It'll be a short election. Verse 15. So I took the... All right, Tommy. So I took the leaders of your tribes, wise and respected men. I set them over you as leaders, commanders of thousands. Now listen to this breakdown. Commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, and officers for the tribes. How is our government set up here? You have the federal government, you have the state government, you have the county government, you have city governments. In other words, so our government in the United States was set up on the order of what he's talking about here. And there was a reason for that. Verse 16, I commanded your judges at the time, hear the cases between your brothers and judge rightly between a man and his brother or his resident alien. So he's setting up a way for them to govern themselves, not just a set of laws, not just a set of instructions, but he's setting up a way for them to govern themselves after he's gone. Moses is not always going to be there. Verse 17. Do not show partiality with deciding a case. Listen to small and great alike. Do not be intimidated by anyone, for judgment belongs to God. Do not show partiality. The literal Hebrew, if you translate that literal from Hebrew, is do not recognize the face of anyone in judgment. So, I mean, that's a good description, but if your Bible was written that way, it'd be hard to read. Listen to the small and great. The literal translation is listen to the small person as you listen to the great person. That's good advice. Now look at this quote. This has to do with us. This has to do with our nation. This has to do with who we are. And this is a quote. So I didn't write this. Historical research shows that from 1760 to 1805, The Bible was cited more often than any European author or political philosophy, and Deuteronomy was the most often referenced book in our founding fathers. The most often Now, did you read that in your history class? But look it up and you'll find out it's true. That's the most quoted. Pardon? You did read that. But they use that. It's cited, Deuteronomy, it was cited nearly twice as often as John Locke's writing, who was the legal thinker of the day back in the 18th century. And John Locke's writing, and Apostle Paul was mentioned about as often as Montesquieu was. This reflects the deep influence of Protestant scripture on the political culture of the era. So when people ask the question, was our nation founded on Christian principles, depending on how you look at it. Is our nation a Christian nation? Depending on how you look at it. But what I can tell you is, and what you see from this, and look it up for yourself, don't just take my word for it, they look to the Bible and to the book of Deuteronomy and to the different writings in the Bible more than they did to any other writings there was when they came up with the structure of our government. That might be the reason it kind of reflects their government and way of thinking. Israel's disobedience at Kadesh Barnea, verse 19. We then set out from Horeb and went across all the great and terrible wilderness you saw on the way to the hill country of the Amorites, just as the Lord our God had commanded us. God commanded them to do this. When we reached Kadesh Barnea, I said to you, you have reached the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving you. Now look at that statement. He didn't say, I brought you to this land, you see if you like it, and you can go ahead and take it if you want to. He says, God has given you this land. Not only did they have permission to go in there, they had the power of God to back up what they were doing. See, the Lord your God has set the land before you. He says, go up and take possession of it as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has told you. Do not be afraid or discouraged. Then all of you approached me and said, let's send men. You all remember this from reading back in Numbers. He said, let's send men ahead of us so that they may explore the land. God didn't tell them to send 12 men over there. They said, let's send some people over there to spy them out. How many did they send? 12. Why did they pick 12? One from each tribe. How many came back with a good report? 2. But 2 came back with a good report. 10 came back with a bad report. And all of you approached me and said, let's send men ahead of us so that they may explore the land for us and bring us back a report about the route we should go up and the cities we should come to. The plan seemed good to me, so I selected 12 men from among you, one from each tribe. So why is Moses reminding them of their failures at this particular time? Because this is when they're getting ready to enter the land the second time. Or more to the point, I said, their father's failures. Because it was their fathers that had failed, not them. But in essence, through them, they had failed. Was the decision to take the land the fault of the 10, not to take the land, was it the fault of the 10 spies? 10 spies came back with an evil report. Was it their fault they didn't go into the promised land? A lot of times we look at it like that, but it wasn't. The people got all upset and they wouldn't go in. We're not going in there. Those people are too big for it. There's giants in the land. And we look like, in Numbers it says this, we look like grasshoppers to them in our own sight, and we look like grasshoppers to them. What had they forgotten? God said, I have given this land to you. If you have God to back you up, who else do you need? 34. Skip on down to 34. When the Lord heard your words, he grew angry and swore an oath. None of these men in this evil generation will see the good land I swore to give your ancestors except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. He will see it, and I will give him. Who else? There's somebody else. He's down here further. He's further down here. He will see it, and I will give him and his descendants the land on which he has set foot, because he remained loyal to the... I want you to think about something. When they got to the promised land this time, how old was Caleb? He was 84 years old. And Joshua asked him at the time when they came in there, he said, all right, what land do you want? And he picked the land of the giants. At 84 years old, he was going to tackle the land of the giants. That tells you the difference in Caleb and the rest of these people down here. Verse 37, the Lord was angry with me also because of you. So Moses, he's putting the blame on them. Remember, Moses didn't get to go into the promised land. He said, I got angry because of you. And who did he get angry because of? He got angry because of himself. But everybody wants to blame somebody. The Lord was angry with me also because of you, and said, you will not enter there either. Joshua, son of Nun, who attends you, will enter it. Encourage him, for he will enable Israel to inherit it. Verse 39. Your children, who you said would be plunder. And that's what their fathers had said 40 years before. Our children will become slaves to them. They'll be plundered to them. That's what they said. He said, well, your fathers had said this, your sons who don't yet know good from evil will enter there. I will give them the land, and they will take possession of it. They will take possession. You didn't. Your fathers didn't. They backed out. And so, do you remember what happened when they got to the promised land? They sent the 12 spies over there. They came back. 10 of them all 12 of them said it's the land flowing with milk and honey, and brought some of the produce back to show them how great it was. And then they decided, they all broke down and started crying when they told them there was giants in the land, and people are too powerful for us and all this, and we're not going in. And God got ticked off at them. You can understand why. And then after that, they said, well, we'll go in. He said, you've missed your chance. They want to do it on their schedule instead of God's. It sounds like us. Verse 41. You answer me, you have sinned against the Lord. We will go up and fight just as the Lord our God commanded us. Then each of you put on his weapons of war, and thought it would be easy to go up into the hill country. But the Lord said to me, tell them, don't go up and fight, for I am not with you to keep you from being defeated by this enemy. Did they listen? No, they didn't listen the first time. They didn't listen this time. Sounded like a habit of theirs. Verse 45. When you returned, you wept before the Lord, but he didn't listen to your request or pay attention to you. For this reason, you stayed in Kadesh as long as you did. That's the end of chapter 1. Richard Elliott Friedman says, Moses reminds the people that you didn't listen, and so later, he didn't listen. You didn't listen to him, yeah, he didn't listen to you. Any questions or comments?
Well, it surprises me for Moses that couldn't speak to start with, and Aaron Hopsworth. He had a lot to say later on.
I said this more times than one. Moses lied when he told God that he couldn't speak well. Because when Stephen, look in the book of Acts, when Stephen's telling the story, he says, Moses, a man mighty in word and deed. So Moses was like the rest of us. He said, I can't speak that good. And he looked at one excuse right after another. So he wound up going. I've never made any excuses personally. Diana, can you turn off the camera? Any questions or comments?